Okay. My name is Jeckle Phenderson, KSC. I'm a tree medium. I speak for the trees. I'm just beginning to sort of delve into, philosophically speaking, this whole idea of biosemiosis, which concerns the way that life speaks to one another. And so I'm looking at it from a phenomenological perspective, in that I'm trying to see what humans can experience in terms of interacting with other species and other forms of life, rather than just sort of having this anthrocentric view of communication as just strictly being human to human, just sort of to pushing the limits of what we conceive of as communication, to sort of interpret different phenomena and interactions between species as a communication of a different sort. And you can look at just things such as people's interactions with their house pets, and how house pets are sort of conditioned by their owners for like food responses and the types of communication and symbols that entails. So I guess I'm just sort of trying to get more into that, and also as a sort of a quasi-spiritual practice, but one that I think is rooted sort of in like a material grounding of the world, just seeing everything in our cosmos as in constant interaction with one another, and the dynamic flow and interplay of the universe. I just want to start meditating upon the different elemental constructions of our universe, and especially those living constructions, and whatever kind of energy or consciousness, I guess you could say, just what kind of spirit you might say, in some kind of in other sort of religious understandings of this phenomenon that I'm trying to study. How can we communicate with these beings that are different from ourselves, and be able to try to see things from their perspectives a little bit more. Yeah, I'm a student at UBC now. I study sociology and philosophy mainly, but UBC's philosophy department is a bit too analytic and bourgeois by extension to my liking, so I'm more in favor of the continental tradition myself, post-structuralism especially, so I just sort of do a lot of independent study and pretty autodidactic in general. My political philosophy is largely informed by a lot of like libertarian, communist and like socialist ideas, or like a lot of like left Marxist thought as well, like from like Rosa Luxemburg to Antonio Gramsci, and just even like the Russian nihilist movement has been pretty influential in my political thinking. But I like to add a bit of a utopian twist to it, because I sort of have these strong hunches, I guess, about some kind of imminent possible collapse of civilization scenario, which I think is unfortunate, but I think it will also give us a lot of opportunity to rebuild from a lot of the damage that civilization has wrought to not only to the environment, but also to the human psyche. The writer Robert Anton Wilson, in one of his books, describes humans as a domesticated primate, because society has largely been able to condition us and you know convince us to rely on it. Like now, things are so convenient for us. We can just go to the grocery store to get food, and all we have to do is buy into these social games and all these premises, the social contract. Yeah, just sort of like buying into this idea of money and like working and in a large way ceding one's autonomy to whatever system one's participating in. And so I think that people should vote by their very existence and participate in the political system that they would like to see. In my utopia, human life would take on a radically different angle, I think, and manifestation than what we have in the present society. It would be more holistically intertwined with nature. I think human life already is just inherently entwined with nature because we are natural beings. We aren't artificial or like outside of nature. I spoke earlier about anthropocentrism, and that sort of inherent in the belief of anthropocentrism is that humans are outside of nature and we're able to sort of be central and dominant, but we're in fact part of nature. And I think as a society, once we accept that, we'll be able to sort of interweave our culture into the natural order of things around us, and to be able to have a greater harmony. Even in the world today, like psychology, environmental psychology, you have these studies coming out that talk about all the benefits of being in nature. And so to have sort of like cities that are immersed in like natural surroundings and are just indistinguishable from the nature around us, and having that sort of to nurture and sustain us, having just food forests and gardens and abundance all around us, and herbs that we can use to like treat ourselves, and having a just education on a mass scale of like what these different plants are and how we can use them and treat them respectfully. I think returning to a more natural, atavistic state of our ancestors and our natural selves wouldn't require to sort of get rid of all modern technology, as some extreme anarcho-primitivists have suggested. And I think they've had some good reasoning behind their perspectives, but I think ultimately our most advanced technologies today, even though they've been conceived of in a late capitalist setting, they will be useful in adapting our societies to the natural world around us, and creating abundance through technologies and wealth redistribution. Things like that, having sort of like computerized means of production, and sort of obviating the need for having human bureaucracies to manage our economies and our resources. The Illuminati were a historical secret society that, by their existence and ability to infiltrate many Freemasonic lodges, were able to orchestrate, in large part, like, took part in the conspiracy behind the French Revolution, and were able to make that happen and depose of some monarchs. And some suspect their involvement in the American Revolution as well. I think that society is largely a pyramid scheme. You have like all the base of people at the bottom, like the working class, supporting the structure, and you have this group of the power elite at the top. They're harnessing all this energy from the masses that are like enabling their society to run, and they're able to access all the privileges from it and to try to experience some sort of illumination, is almost like they're given like, you know, access to sort of like the freedom to travel or mobilize resources in ways that are just unimaginable to most people, and like changing their like material reality. Like the elite themselves like sort of you know, find a way like through the mechanism of the social structure, find a way to try to achieve like godlike status through like the exploitation and the domination of others, like to do their bidding and to feed energy off of, and to you know, change reality to their liking. And like so you can, you know, see this like literally in terms of like corporations lobbying the government, just like pouring money at issues and like spending all these resources to try to you know, influence policy in the direction that they'd like to see, or just even as far as like investing money into the built environment, and only the moneyed interests, the capitalists, are able to sort of change the built environment and like create the structures that they'd like to see. I think our philosophical understanding of nihilism is sort of in modern times portrayed in sort of a stereotypical fashion, in that you have just all these things such as nihilist memes that sort of seem to romanticize this image of like suicide and like the existentially depressed like nihilist. And I don't think that's what nihilist is all about. I think it's in a lot of ways a liberatory movement, in that once you recognize that there is no inherent meaning in the universe, you are able to basically deconstruct your own values to such an extent that you in some sense face derealization, oneness with the void. In a lot of ways this can mirror a mystical state, and I think being one with nothingness is equivalent to being one with everything. But, you know, men have been wearing non-bifurcating garments since the beginning of time, pretty much. Like, just like if you look at the tunic, just such a simple and elegant innovation fashion that both men and women wore for thousands of years. Like, it's just pretty chill. Like, you get a nice little breeze going. Like, what's the big deal? If people are able to wrap their heads around this philosophically, and to get into these sort of far out headspaces, they can sort of, on a political level, come together to co-navigate this ambiguous existential reality that we have all around us, the mystery that we call life, and to, if not create meaning where there is no meaning, to just sort of harmonize in our intentions, and to create a society that sort of values a lot of different opinions and cultivates a lot of different aesthetics. My experiences with nihilism and coming to sort of appreciate that particular movement, as with I think many people, just sort of gives this aesthetic fascination for the idea of the void itself. The personal is political, and that was just one of those activist slogans, like, you know, from the 70s, talking about how the things we do in our personal lives and the lifestyles we have and the ideas we share and espouse and the ways we take up or use public space, and just like by being ourselves or expressing a certain way of being, we're able to create a politics in that situation that is representing what we want to convey. And a lot of times people just think of politics as just being this faceless like machine that's sort of like ruling everything from above, which is the institutions that we have in liberal democracies, like in the West, is very much set up by the power elite. Like they select their candidates from higher socioeconomic backgrounds that have gone to law school usually, or just like well-bred or educated and groomed in these bourgeois ideals. But at the same time, the most of the political power in any like political situation is held by the people. They're the ones that sustain it. And even though I think if you buy into the whole theses of Marx, in that the workers have power because they are able to produce the structures of society, I think automation might create some precarity in capitalism and give more power to the ruling elite, because they'll be able to basically liquidate the workforce, and they can do away with like the people in general. So I think while people still do have real power, they should do everything that they can to depose of that elite and sort of usurp the means of production and smash the apparatuses of control that have blocked human freedom for so long. And people need to band together for that and see through the divisions that have been so carefully created for centuries upon centuries, really, by people that would rather have us divided than to unite and seize what's truly ours.
In a society which was guided by principles of discord and chaos, how would we ensure human safety and human health?
Well, I think that, chaos gets a bad rap. In Discordian, or actually really just ancient Greek cosmology, chaos was just the chasm that came between the void and creation, and so it's sort of this infinite potentiality. Discordians believe that every being is a pope, and popes are infallible and can use their own judgment to decide what they want to believe or disbelieve, or or if they want to not believe anything at all. And so I think a Discordian society would be one that sort of appreciate the balance between order and disorder, how that might stray into strife if a true sort of balance and harmony is not maintained. And also people would be able to come together and tolerate lots of divergent viewpoints. There's a Discordian maxim that says we Discordians must stick apart, and I think that also is emphasizing the whole individualistic element, and I think that we must have autonomy as people to sort of create the conditions, reproduce the conditions for our own life. So I believe in autonomous interdependence, and so I believe as a society people should be sort of educated as best they can and sort of creating their own sustenance and being in charge of their own lives, their own existence. But I recognize humans as social animals are very much dependent on one another in a society to depend on their basic needs being met. So different people can specialize in different things and have different strengths and weaknesses. I think that the whole Illuminati type thinking has its limits, and I think that we can move beyond that in our new, coming into a new paradigm. And I think if people did take the prerogative to do that and to actively create the situations and the types of political environments that they'd like to foster, then we can create a utopian society built on participatory democracy, ultimately. I think that in addressing crime, a justice system that is truly just would necessarily need to be restorative to sort of alleviate some of the historical inequalities that are deeply felt in the communities that you look at that are disproportionately, committing these so-called crimes and acts of terrorism. Where you see like things like blowback and Islamophobia as being like directly linked to like people becoming terrorists, or just things like crime stemming from the fabric of the capitalist system itself. We have this sort of enforced system of artificial scarcity, where even though we have plenty of resources, they're very poorly distributed and just given to the elite almost exclusively, and the rest, the poor and the ever-shrinking middle class is left to fend for the scraps. You have all these impoverished and communities that have had structural violence committed against them for just generations on generations. And so I think in dealing with crime, we need a justice system that can be just and humane with these people and treat them as people and not as criminals. We need to look at this, from a more progressive angle and not from these sort of perspectives that have been imposed upon us from above as these thoughts and beliefs and ideologies of the ruling class. All crime, from petty theft to just the biggest Wall Street banking crimes and fraud and embezzlement, all stems from the nature of the capitalist system, this blind pursuit for profit at the expense of not only the people of our world, but also our environment that supports and sustains us and makes the conditions for our very lives. And if we don't respect the wishes of the people or the environment, we're not going to have a society. We can't, because just pitting all these elements against itself is a recipe for disaster. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think it's sort of the backup plan of the ruling elite to just colonize other worlds, and once this one's over and done with, we can just dispose of it and move on and like have all these technologies available to the very few, and just automate production and just get rid of the working class entirely. Just allow us to allow the common people to just sort of wallow and languish in a dying hellscape, to be honest with you. Like, that's just been endlessly polluted, and I think we need to fight back as eco-warriors, as communists. We need to bring the power back into the people's hands, into nature's hands, and to dismantle these oppressive forces of industrial capitalism that have been imposed upon us by not only those that came before us, but also those invested that have power commitments to the current way of running things, that are privileging from those commitments and are continuing to destroy our world and our way of life, just exploiting us and the environment just for their own profit and their own gain. And we need to take that away from them, because it's not theirs, it's all of ours.